One horror story a night, bros. Today we continue with the Indonesian horror film Satan's Slaves. The story takes place in a remote village. A woman has been bedridden for several years. Whenever she needs to eat, drink, or use the bathroom, she has to ring a bell to summon her children and husband. At first, she and her husband couldn't conceive for years. They were likely infertile. But then one day, this woman suddenly broke the dry spell. She gave birth to the eldest daughter, Rini. Immediately after, she popped out 3 sons, just like laying eggs. But shortly after the youngest one was born, the woman fell ill as if cursed and never got up again. Rini, who was in college, had to drop out because of this. To save on expenses, she stays home to take care of her brothers and sick mother. However, today when Rini heard the bell and went upstairs, her mother was suddenly staring at the ceiling as if possessed. Because since she got sick, she couldn't speak. She could only make aba-aba screaming sounds. The mother kept staring at the ceiling. Rini also looked up with her, as if she was warning her that something was up there. That night, the second brother Tony came home from school. He was also startled by his mother's sudden convulsion. Initially, he was kindly combing his mother's hair. Suddenly, the window behind him opened without any wind, like someone pulled it open from the outside. Tony quickly went to close it, afraid his mother would freeze. But when he turned back, his mother was suddenly half-sitting, eyes wide open, staring darkly at Tony's direction. And this also hints that this house won't be peaceful tonight. Late at night, Rini heard the bell again in her sleep. It was like a reflex. She climbed out of bed and walked to her mother's room. When Rini pushed the door open, she saw her mother standing by the window. She could actually walk and was wearing a white wedding dress. Rini walked to her mother, but just as she touched her shoulder, a violent ringing sound came from the bedside. At this moment, Mom is still lying in bed. So who is this person Rini is touching? As her brain spun rapidly, that person slowly turned their head with an exaggerated smile. At the same time, Rini woke up instantly. It was just a dream. But a few seconds later, the dream reflected into reality. In her drowsiness, Rini once again heard crisp bell sounds coming from her mother's room. Thinking of the white-dressed woman she just dreamt of, Rini clearly sped up her steps and pushed the door open. And everything happening was exactly as she just dreamt. Mother was standing motionless by the window. Rini was naturally happy, but after touching her body, she subconsciously moved her gaze to the bed. When she looked back, Mom suddenly gasped like she was having a seizure, then collapsed and never got up again.
Papa! Papa!
Dad. Hearing the noise, the other children rushed in, throwing themselves on the woman's body, crying loudly. But their father, Barry, might have been a bit excited, because a few hours earlier, just before falling asleep, Barry leaned into his wife's ear and said some words asking her to leave as soon as possible.
Мне очень жалко детей.
These words seemed to be overheard by Rini, who was collecting laundry. But it was a bit far, so she wasn't very sure. By the next morning, the village chief held a funeral for this family, mumbling some scriptures. Maybe because it's hot and humid there, they believe in burying quickly, and didn't drag it out for days. A young guy helping put the body into the coffin is the village chief's son. After the funeral, he kept pulling Rini to talk, saying his name is Hendra. Rini thought he was hitting on her, so she ignored him. But Hendra was actually there to say something quite important. Just now during the burial, he saw a woman wearing a white veil. Soon it was evening. Father Barry proposed going to the city to work, leaving early tomorrow morning. Rini was unhappy. Mom just died and Dad is leaving. But she couldn't beat her father's determination to earn money, because their house is currently under mortgage, and the family is so poor that no one even has an old brick phone. So under these circumstances, Barry went to pack his luggage. The second brother Tony couldn't sleep these days, so he had the habit of listening to the radio to sleep. But vaguely from the radio, he heard some bell sounds, dingling, ringing constantly. After confirming it wasn't coming from the broadcast, Tony turned on the light and walked out of the room. Following the sound, he opened his mother's door. Seeing the bell fall from midair, Tony immediately realized something. He ran back as fast as he could and quickly covered himself tight with blankets and pillows. By the next morning, their father had already left. Big sister's making breakfast for the third brother, Bondi. To save expenses, Tony usually doesn't eat. He also wanted to get a couple of noodles from Bondi to taste. Facing the slightly stingy brother, Tony didn't get angry. Instead, he took out a toy camera from his bag and gave it to him. Then Tony went to school. The two younger brothers gathered around this toy and started fiddling. There is a lever on the side, and every click switches the picture inside the camera. At first it was scenery, deserts, oceans, sunflowers and such. The little brother watched and got mesmerized. When he carelessly switched again, the toys showed the woman wearing the white veil. Time quickly reached night. Tony listened to the radio as usual and drifted to sleep. Suddenly, his mother's shouting voice rang out from the radio. Sounding half dead, he was scared and turned off the device to calm down. Suddenly, his mother flashed right to Tony's bedside, giving him a jump scare. He didn't understand why Mom targeted him after dying. Seeing the comb used to comb his mother's hair, Tony decided to return it to the grave tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, the fourth brother here got up from bed, couldn't hold it. He went to shake Bondi sleeping next to him, but no matter how he shook, Bondi wouldn't go with him. Helpless, the fourth brother opened the door and went to the toilet alone. Hanging on the hallway wall is their mother's photo. She was a singer when alive, doing pretty well. While the fourth brother was peeing, a camera slowly approached his back. People are weakest when using the toilet. But luckily, the person tapping him was his brother. The two walked together, returning to the bedroom. But Bondi realized his brother stood in the hallway, not daring to move. He communicated with sign language, saying their mom is terrifying. Bondi poked his head out to look at the hallway. Not knowing was fine. Once noticed, it indeed looked very creepy. So he took a white sheet from the funnel nearby. Should be leftovers from the funeral. Two people dumbfoundedly approached the portrait, and the brother covered his eyes. Then with Bondi's forceful throw, the white cloth covered something in midair. Looking at the shape, it was clearly a person. Bondi was dumbfounded, quietly signaling his brother to run. Luckily, Renus' room was right next door. He hugged Ian, but Ian kept saying there was a ghost. But looking again, the white cloth was just draped over the frame. Nothing abnormal. Rini asked the fourth brother Ian. Ian said he didn't see anything. It was Bondi jumping up that scared him half to death. Hearing such loud noise, their grandma didn't come out. Instead, she was gasping while writing a letter in her room. By the next morning, Tony buried the mother's bell and comb into the grave mound and went to school. Rini was also called out for a walk by Hendra. In the process, he mentioned the mysterious woman who suddenly appeared at the funeral. At first, Hendra thought it was a passing villager, but until one day he passed by Rini's house, he saw that woman's figure again. Rini curiously asked what that person looked like. Hendra blurted out she looked like Rinus' deceased mother. He judged that person must be some evil spirit, usually disguising as the dead. But hearing this, Rini was dismissive. She firmly refused to believe in ghosts and spirits. Meanwhile, their grandma was pushing her wheelchair hard, as if to accomplish something. When Rini finished her date and returned home, Grandma was missing. Grandma, they searched everywhere. Finally, following Bondi's scream, Rini found Grandma's body in a deep well at home. She had drowned in the well. Family accident happened. Villagers gathered to help. They wrapped the deceased's body in white cloth, held another simple funeral for Rina's family. Back home, Rini found a letter in Grandma's room that she wrote before dying. The recipient is a man named Budiman, with his address on it. The content Grandma wrote roughly was hoping this Budiman could save their family. To figure out what happened, Rini asked Hendra to drive her to the city. Soon the two arrived at a cramped apartment. Knocked on Budiman's door. Turns out this man was Grandma's high school classmate, now working in fields related to theology. Budiman said Grandma hated Rina's mother very much before, because at that time, Being an artist was an undignified profession. Plus, Rena's mother couldn't conceive for a long time. And after she gave birth to Rini and the youngest son, Mother started to be chronically ill. Thus, Grandma believed the children were not gifts from God, but from Satan.
Ini pasti cuma tahayul, Pak.
Kalau ini isapan jempol, untuk apa kalian datang ke sini?
Buddhaman had to hand an article to Rini, saying it was some content he wrote. Inside, there is a method to save their family. Before leaving, he told Rini, Satan cannot take any of you away, provided that you still love each other. Soon after, Rini left the book at home without reading it. But Tony understood immediately after reading. He found Rini, said this book mentioned a woman. She was married for 10 years, but couldn't conceive. Later, the woman finally gave birth smoothly. Tony said in many cities there are groups worshipping Satan, and the group is related to fertility. Whoever can't conceive, they can join this group. Then they can get pregnant. But the last-born child, once he turns 7, must become a sacrifice offering to this cult. Big Sister didn't understand what her brother meant. Tony further analyzed, asking Rini if she is 22 this year. And Tony is 16, Bondi is 10. The age difference between the three is very regular, exactly 6 years. Assuming Mom couldn't bear to hand us to the cult people. So before the youngest child turned 7, she was always trying to have another one. And in 3 days, their fourth brother Ian will turn 7. But the article mentioned, only when the child's family gives up on him will he be taken by Satan's undead. Rini is currently in a state of not seeing supernatural phenomena.
Все понятно, это чушь. Если бы написали, что его похитит, я бы еще поверила.
So she is somewhat unwilling to believe these things. But just as she cooked for her brothers and served it on the table, the wheelchair originally in Grandma's room rolled to Rina's front at this time, accompanied by Grandma's gasping sounds. When Rini moved her gaze back, she saw her deceased grandma on the glass opposite. Finally, Rini called the village chief to her home. Because he is a religious person, Rini wanted to call him over to see what the reason was. The chief said dead people won't disturb the living. What you see is usually other things disguised as your loved ones. He also told Rini starting today, they must pray every night. In his view, all things fear God. Late at night, Rini was washing her face, but suddenly she felt a chill on her back. Turning her head, that woman in white appeared again, although she looked like her young mother. But after hearing what the chief said during the day, she quickly put on a special headscarf and started praying, silently chanting something and bowing on the ground several times. At this time, Rini suddenly frowned, feeling uncomfortable. When the camera slowly turned to the window, it turned out her mom appeared, staring at her from outside. Then suddenly dashed into the room. Rini also sensed it. Scared, she glanced back but saw nothing, while her mouth was still silently chanting some prayer words. Scene changes, the 4 siblings ran non-stop to the chief's side. Because just now the 4th brother Ian also saw the dead grandma appearing by his bed, saying weird things about taking him away. Then the sister and brother stayed up all night, staring at that article until daytime. Tony this time saw very shocking content in it, that the women participating in this ritual are not impregnated by their own husbands, but by male members of this cult. Big Sister was a bit shocked. Tony asked again, don't you think us 4 siblings look very different? He said Big Sister has dark skin and straight hair. He himself has fair skin, same curly hair as Bondi. And Ian is semi-mute, can only speak 1 word. At this time, Hendra said he had to go to the city. Just now that master called Buddhaman called, saying there is something very important to give to Rini. Soon Hendra went to the city alone and met the master. Saw the master giving him a letter, and whispered in Hendra's ear, don't know what was said. But after listening, Hendra was very anxious, full throttle, rushing back to the village. And while he was driving, someone suddenly dashed onto the middle of the road from the grass. Hendra subconsciously dodged, but when he looked again, that person actually turned into a big truck. His clothes corner got caught by the hook, dragged for a few meters, then crushed to death by the wheel. Not long after, Hendra's remains were transported home by villagers. His father saw it and instantly lost his usual solemn demeanor, face full of sorrow. During the pulling, that letter fell from Hendra's pocket. Rini saw it, picked it up and put it in her pocket, then buried this young man who died prematurely with the villagers. And at night, Rini pushed open the window, seemed to spot Hendra's figure in the woods. She thought her eyes were playing tricks, but immediately her left hand was grabbed by a force trying to pull her out. Rini screamed. The village chief aside saw this scene, did not choose to go up and help, turned and left. Luckily, at the critical moment, their father Barry rushed to the village. Seeing father return, the few felt much relieved and swarmed up. Upon learning mother also died after he left, Barry couldn't help but start crying. Then he told Rini and others, "Tomorrow morning, we pack up and move to the small apartment in the city." At this time, Rini found Bahri, asking what exactly he said to mother that day. Bahri heard and said he did it for this family too. He felt children shouldn't suffer. But Rini thought it was father giving up on mother. That indirectly caused her to be taken away by Satan. Meanwhile, Tony here was taking Ian to the toilet. But just as Ian stepped in, the door suddenly closed by itself. Bahri upstairs heard the noise and rushed over. Used brute force to crash the door open. Finding the youngest son fell into the well. He jumped down without thinking, groping around for a long time inside. He finally found the son about to drown. Bahri held him up, using the rope pulled by Rini and Tony to slowly rise, and on the water surface beneath their feet, a wet head was quietly emerging. But fortunately, Bahri climbed out of the well safely in the end. But before they could catch a breath, with the heavy rain outside, a group of black-clad people holding umbrellas were slowly approaching the house. "Who are they?" Rini quickly closed doors and windows and explained to father they came to take Ian away. "But as long as we unite, they have no way. But these people outside have ways to torture them." Immediately, that wheelchair rolled over again and banged loudly against the three opposite. In momentary panic, the three only cared about the danger in front and got locked in a room. The fourth brother on the other side was about to be taken by Satan's gang. Luckily, at the critical moment, the brother of similar age acted in time, dragged the fourth brother back again. And when hearts are united, the house indeed returned to peace. Bahri angrily held a kitchen knife, rushed outside yelling. Hearing this, these black-clad people seemed to chicken out.
Why? Anak-anakku tidak ada yang boleh kalian ambil. Kami tidak rela. Kalau ada yang berani ambil anak-anakku, maju! Hadapi aku! Maju!
Just slightly raised hands, sprinkled something on the ground marking it, then left. By the next morning, everyone packed up, but the car coming to pick them up was late. Rini got bored and strolled in the woods, accidentally found a large patch of scattered, red bean-like granules on the ground. These things were left intentionally by the black-clad men last night. Then until very late, the pickup car still didn't arrive. Big Sister remembered the letter Hendra brought back yesterday. Satan's grand plan to spread offspring. After reading the content, she quickly woke up the sleeping Tony. She asked Tony if he was disturbed by Grandma's soul. Tony said no, and the three of them were the same. Only the youngest Ian was scared by Grandma several times. Rini told Tony this is the article the master just updated. In the new content, he overturned the previous statement that the last child born through the cult, although will be taken, but not as a sacrifice, because they are Satan's descendants and won't be in danger. Just as the voice fell, familiar bell sounds rang outside.
Bagaimana kalau ternyata selama ini nenek berusaha menyelamatkan kita?
Karini, coba dengar kau ngomong apa. Ini sinting. Ian adik kita, dari lahir sudah kita jaga.
Ada satu lagi yang ditulis.
Apa?
Para anggota sekte datang ke rumah anak iblis bukan untuk diambil, tapi untuk memberi tanda kepada penjemput mereka.
Siapa penjemput mereka?
The two opened the door and saw their mother slowly walking down from upstairs. Turns out she is the shepherd and has become Satan's servant. Meanwhile, the third brother found Ian, who hasn't spoken for a long time, muttering to himself facing the window. He said he was talking to friends outside. After speaking, he left the room smiling. When the third brother turned to look at the window, he was startled. Outside stood 2 corpses wrapped in white cloth, and Barry, who was sleeping, also found something wrong. In his daze, he found in his hand appeared a bell. He was shocked and turned to look at his back. Found his long-dead wife sleeping beside him. Then the 3 people upstairs quickly ran out of the room. Found the third brother hiding under the bed. Then they found Ian walking down the stairs smiling. Behind him followed Satan's shepherd, which is their mother. Seeing this, Rini didn't make a sound, but closed the door and let Ian leave. Although Barry finally couldn't help rushing out. But it was too late. Ian already stood in the opposite woods with Mother. "Come here, Papa." And behind the woods is a legion of living dead. They were instructed to stop Barra's family. Seeing this, Tony first dragged Father into the house to avoid the edge. But the living dead didn't give up attacking. They swarmed into the house, banging the door desperately, mouths constantly making roaring sounds. Luckily, when they had nowhere to retreat, the wheelchair rolled again, blocking the main door. Through the mirror, one can clearly see it was Grandma blocking these living dead for them. At this time, that driver also arrived at the house, shouting for them to come quickly to the car. 4 people ran out of the house just like that. And the driver who came to pick them up was exactly the master named Budaman. Several people successfully escaped under the pursuit of the living dead. Their figures slowly disappeared in the car's rearview mirror. Time flies. A year passed quickly. At this time, Rini's family of 4 moved into a small apartment. This day, a woman came to knock on the door, sent some food to their home saying she cooked too much. And ever since Rini's family moved here, this woman often sent them food and drinks. Also said, "Don't hesitate to say whatever you want to eat." Rini thought she met a kind-hearted neighbor. But when this woman left and returned to her own home, a man was sitting in her room, proudly saying, "We must ensure they won't move." Then, following the movement of the camera, came to a map.
Sudah waktunya kita panen lagi.
Sabar, Darmina.
It was full of many tags, used to highlight certain locations, and under the map, placed a jar full of those red bean-like granules. Turns out these 2 are also Satan's shepherds, specially marking for Satan, collecting his children scattered in the human world. Here the movie ends.